Right now, as you're watching this video, something is happening at gas stations across America that should terrify every single person who thought trade wars were easy to win. Prices are climbing, and they're climbing fast. But here's what the mainstream media isn't telling you, and this is absolutely crucial to understand. The people paying for this trade war aren't the ones sitting in Washington making the decisions. The people paying are you, your neighbors, your family, and every American who drives to work, heats their home, or buys anything that gets transported by truck. And while Americans are digging deeper into their wallets just to fill up their tanks, something else is happening on the other side of the Pacific Ocean that should send chills down the spine of every geopolitical strategist in the United States. China is watching, China is moving, and China is positioning itself to become Canada's new best friend. If you think this is just about tariffs and trade numbers, you need to stick around for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to reveal will completely change how you see the relationship between these three economic giants. Let me take you back to where this all started, because understanding the origin of this crisis is essential to grasping just how badly things have gone wrong. When the United States decided to impose sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods, the stated goal was simple and, on the surface, made complete sense. The idea was to protect American industries, bring manufacturing jobs back home, and correct what many saw as unfair trade practices that had been hurting American workers for decades. Politicians stood at podiums and promised that Canada would have no choice but to accept American demands. They painted a picture of swift victory, of a neighbor to the north quickly coming to the table and agreeing to new terms that favored American interests. But here's the thing about trade wars that almost nobody in power wants to admit publicly. They rarely go according to plan, and the consequences have a nasty habit of hitting the people least prepared to handle them. Canada, as it turns out, is not some small economy that can be easily pushed around. This is something that seems to have caught many people off guard, and frankly, it shouldn't have. Canada is one of the largest oil and natural gas exporters in the world. Let that sink in for a moment. The country that America just started a trade war with is the same country that supplies a massive portion of the oil and gas that keeps the American economy running. We're talking about crude oil, natural gas, refined petroleum products, and a whole range of energy resources that flow across the border every single day. In fact, the United States imports more oil from Canada than from any other country on Earth. Not Saudi Arabia, not Russia, not Venezuela. Canada. And when you start a trade war with your biggest energy supplier, well, let's just say the economics get complicated very quickly. Now here's where things start to get really interesting, and I mean genuinely jaw-dropping when you look at the numbers. Since these tariffs took effect, gas prices in key American states have started climbing in ways that are making consumers extremely nervous. We're seeing increases that hit hardest in the Midwest and northern border states, regions that are most dependent on Canadian energy imports. These aren't small increases we're talking about. In some areas, prices have jumped significantly in just a matter of weeks, and experts are warning that this is just the beginning. The supply chain disruptions, the uncertainty, the retaliatory measures from Canada, all of these factors are combining to create a perfect storm that is hitting American wallets directly. And the timing couldn't be worse. With inflation already a major concern for millions of families trying to make ends meet, adding higher gas prices on top of everything else is like pouring gasoline on an already burning fire. But wait, because this is where the story takes a turn that nobody in Washington seems to have anticipated, and it's something you absolutely need to understand if you want to see where this situation is headed. Canada didn't just sit back and take these tariffs. They didn't come crawling to the negotiating table begging for mercy. Instead, Canada did something that has fundamentally changed the calculations for everyone involved. They started looking east, across the Pacific, toward the world's second-largest economy. China has been waiting for exactly this opportunity, and they are seizing it with both hands. Think about this from China's perspective for just a moment. For years, they've been trying to reduce their dependence on energy sources that are controlled by countries aligned with American interests. They've been diversifying, building relationships, securing supply chains that can't be easily disrupted by Western sanctions or trade policies. And suddenly, here comes Canada, a resource-rich nation with vast oil and gas reserves, looking for new partners because their traditional trading relationship with the United States has become hostile. For China, This is like a gift wrapped up with a bow on top. They don't have to do anything aggressive or risky. They just have to be friendly, offer good trade terms, and wait for Canada to come to them. And that's exactly what's happening. Let me give you some specific details because the scale of what's developing is truly remarkable. Chinese officials have been in active discussions with Canadian counterparts about expanding energy cooperation. We're talking about long-term supply agreements, infrastructure investments, and trade deals that would fundamentally reorient Canadian energy exports toward Asian markets. New pipeline projects that were once considered too expensive or politically difficult are suddenly being reconsidered. Ports on Canada's Pacific coast are being eyed for major expansions that would facilitate increased exports to China. And investment money is starting to flow in ways that should concern anyone who cares about American strategic interests in North America. Now I want you to really think about what this means because the implications are staggering. For decades, the United States has benefited from having a friendly, resource-rich neighbor whose economy was deeply integrated with its own. Canadian oil flowed south, American goods flowed north, and both countries prospered from this arrangement. It wasn't perfect. There were always disputes and negotiations, but the fundamental relationship was one of mutual benefit and strategic alignment. What's happening now threatens to undo decades of economic integration, and the beneficiary won't be the United States. The beneficiary will be China. Consider the strategic dimension for a moment. Energy security is one of the most important factors in determining a nation's geopolitical power. Countries that have secure access to abundant energy resources can project power, support their industries, and weather economic storms. Countries that don't have that security are vulnerable, dependent on others, and limited in their options. For years, America's close relationship with Canada provided a level of energy security that was the envy of the world. Unlike European nations dependent on Russian gas, or Asian countries dependent on Middle Eastern oil transported through vulnerable choke points, the United States had a secure, overland supply of energy from a stable, democratic ally. That advantage is now being squandered over a trade war that is producing exactly the opposite results from what was promised. And here's something else that's not getting nearly enough attention. The jobs that were supposed to come back to America because of these tariffs, where are they exactly? This is a question that deserves a serious answer because it gets to the heart of whether this entire strategy makes any sense. The theory behind protectionist tariffs is that by making imported goods more expensive, you encourage domestic production and create jobs. But that theory breaks down when you're dealing with resources like oil and gas that require massive infrastructure, years of development, and enormous capital investments. You can't just flip a switch and replace Canadian energy with American production. The wells take time to drill, the pipelines take time to build, and the refineries take time to construct. In the meantime, consumers pay higher prices, and businesses face higher costs that they pass on to their customers. The promised jobs remain largely theoretical, while the higher prices are very real and very immediate. I want to share something with you that really illustrates how badly this situation is being handled, and it's something that should make every American citizen angry regardless of their political affiliation. While ordinary people are paying more at the pump, while small businesses are struggling with higher transportation costs, while families are cutting back on other expenses just to afford their commute to work, the people who made these decisions are completely insulated from the consequences. They don't worry about gas prices. They don't worry about heating bills. They make policies that affect millions of lives without experiencing any of the downsides themselves. And when these policies fail, when the trade war backfires, when prices surge and China steps in to fill the vacuum, there's no accountability. There are just new talking points and new blame shifting and new excuses for why things didn't work out as promised. Let's talk about what's happening in Canada right now because understanding the mood there is essential to predicting how this situation will evolve. Canadians are angry, and that anger is translating into political support for getting tougher with the United States. Politicians who advocate for closer ties with America are losing ground to those who argue that Canada needs to diversify its trading relationships and stop being so dependent on a neighbor that treats it as an adversary. Public opinion polls show that favorable views of the United States have dropped significantly since the trade war began. The trust that took generations to build is eroding in a matter of months. And once that trust is gone, it's extremely difficult to rebuild. The Canadian government has responded to American tariffs with retaliatory measures of their own, targeting American products in ways designed to cause maximum political pain. They've hit agricultural products from states that are crucial in American elections. They've targeted manufactured goods from regions that are already struggling economically. And they've made it clear that they're prepared to escalate further if the United States doesn't back down. This isn't posturing. Canadian leaders understand that they're in a fight for their economic sovereignty, and they're willing to accept short-term pain to secure long-term independence. The question is whether American leaders understand the same dynamic, and based on everything we've seen so far, the answer appears to be no. Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because this trade war with Canada is part of a larger pattern that has profound implications for America's role in the world. Over the past several years, the United States has engaged in trade disputes with multiple countries simultaneously. China, Canada, Mexico, the European Union, and others have all been on the receiving end of tariffs and trade restrictions. The idea seems to be that American economic power is so overwhelming that all of these countries will eventually have to capitulate. But that's not what's happening. Instead, these countries are finding ways to work together to create alternative trading arrangements and to reduce their dependence on the American market. The very actions meant to strengthen America's position are actually accelerating the development of a multipolar world where American influence is diminished. China's move to strengthen ties with Canada is just one example of this broader trend. We're seeing similar dynamics play out across the globe. Countries that might have previously aligned with American interests are hedging their bets, building relationships with China, Russia, and other powers that offer alternatives to American dominance. The global financial system, long centered on the US dollar, is facing challenges from countries seeking to conduct trade in other currencies. International institutions that America helped create and long dominated are being bypassed by new organizations and new frameworks that exclude American participation. The trade war with Canada isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a pattern that is reshaping the global order in ways that may prove irreversible. Let me share some numbers with you that really drive home the economic reality of this situation. Before the trade war, bilateral trade between the United States and Canada amounted to hundreds of billions of dollars annually. This trade supported millions of jobs on both sides of the border, created prosperity in communities throughout North America, and provided both countries with access to resources and markets that enhanced their economic competitiveness. Since the tariffs took effect, we've seen a measurable decline in this trade. Shipments have been delayed, contracts have been canceled, and investments have been put on hold as businesses try to figure out what the new rules are and whether they'll change again tomorrow. The uncertainty alone is costing billions of dollars in lost economic activity. And then there's the inflation impact, which is something that deserves special attention. When tariffs make imported goods more expensive, those costs ripple through the entire economy. It's not just the tariff products themselves that become more expensive. Everything that's made using those products, everything that's transported using fuel derived from tariffed oil, everything that's produced by companies facing higher energy costs, all of it becomes more expensive. This inflationary effect is particularly cruel because it hits hardest on the people who can least afford it. Wealthy individuals can absorb higher prices without changing their lifestyles. Working families cannot. They have to make difficult choices about what to cut back on, whether it's healthcare, education, food, or other essentials. The trade war is effectively a regressive tax on the American people, and it's being imposed without any of the democratic accountability that normally accompanies taxation. I want to take a moment to address something that defenders of this trade war often say, because it's important to engage with the strongest arguments on the other side. They argue that short-term pain is necessary for long-term gain, that standing up to trading partners who take advantage of America is worth the temporary costs, and that the alternative of continued unfair trade would be worse. These are legitimate points that deserve serious consideration. There are genuine issues with trade relationships that have developed over the years, and the concerns of American workers who have seen their jobs disappear are real and valid. But here's the problem with this argument as applied to Canada specifically. Canada is not China. Canada is not taking advantage of American workers or stealing American technology or engaging in the kinds of predatory practices that genuinely warrant a strong response. Canada is a democratic ally with similar labor standards, environmental regulations, and rule of law. The trade relationship with Canada has been, on balance, mutually beneficial for both countries. Treating Canada like an adversary makes no strategic sense and is causing harm that far outweighs any theoretical benefits. Now let's talk about what happens next, because the future trajectory of this situation is something that should concern everyone watching. If the current path continues, we're likely to see several developments that will have lasting consequences. First, gas prices will continue to rise as the disruption to energy trade becomes more entrenched. The market will adjust eventually, but that adjustment could take months or years, and in the meantime, consumers will bear the burden. Second, Canada will continue to diversify its trading relationships, and the deals being negotiated with China will become more concrete and more substantial. Once new infrastructure is built and new supply chains are established, they'll be difficult to reverse even if the trade war ends. Third, the broader relationship between the United States and Canada will suffer lasting damage. The countries will remain neighbors, obviously, but the deep integration and trust that characterized the relationship for generations will be replaced by something more transactional and more wary. There is still time to change course, but that window is closing. A negotiated resolution that addresses legitimate concerns on both sides while preserving the fundamental trading relationship is still possible. It would require flexibility, compromise, and a recognition that both countries benefit from cooperation rather than confrontation. But with each passing week that the trade war continues, the alternatives become more attractive to Canada, and the costs of the conflict become more embedded in the economy. The longer this goes on, the harder it will be to return to anything resembling the status quo ante. I want to end by bringing this back to you, the viewer, because ultimately that's who this affects most directly. The decisions being made in Washington and Ottawa have real consequences for real people. When gas prices go up, that's money out of your pocket. When inflation rises, that's your purchasing power declining. When American influence in the world diminishes, that's your country's ability to shape events in its favor being reduced. These aren't abstract concepts or numbers on a page. These are realities that affect your life, your family's life, and your community's prosperity. What can you do about it? First, stay informed. The mainstream narrative about trade wars is often simplistic and misleading. Dig deeper, look at the actual data, and understand what's really happening. That's why channels like this one exist, to provide the kind of analysis and context that you won't get from sound bites and headlines. Second, make your voice heard. Politicians respond to public pressure, and if enough people demand a more sensible approach to trade policy, change becomes possible. Third, prepare yourself financially for the consequences that are coming regardless of policy changes. Higher energy costs are likely to persist for some time, and planning accordingly is just prudent. The U.S.-Canada trade war is a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of economic nationalism taken to extremes. What was supposed to be an easy win has become a costly debacle. What was supposed to strengthen American leverage has pushed a close ally into the arms of America's primary strategic rival. What was supposed to help American workers has raised prices for American consumers. The economic reality has been exposed, and it's far different from the promises that were made. If you found this analysis valuable, if it helped you understand what's really happening in the global economy and how it affects you, then do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos, because this situation is evolving rapidly, and there will be more developments that you need to know about. Share this video with friends and family who might not understand why their gas prices are going up or why the news keeps talking about trade wars. The more people understand what's really happening, the better equipped we all are to navigate these challenging times. Leave a comment below telling me what you think about this situation. Do you support the tariffs despite the costs? Do you think a different approach would be better? I read every comment, and your feedback helps shape future content. The world is changing faster than most people realize, and the decisions being made today will shape the global order for decades to come. America's relationship with its closest neighbor and largest trading partner is being transformed, and not for the better. China is positioning itself to benefit from this self-inflicted wound, and ordinary Americans are paying the price at the gas pump every single day. This is the economic reality that has been exposed, and it's a reality that everyone needs to understand. Thank you for watching until the end. This has been a long video, but the topic deserves thorough treatment. The interconnections between trade policy, energy security, geopolitical alignment, and consumer prices are complex, and understanding them requires more than a quick summary. I hope this analysis has given you a clearer picture of what's happening and why it matters. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay prepared for what's coming. Because in a world of trade wars and shifting alliances, knowledge isn't just power. It's protection. You are an expert YouTube content writer specialized in creating highly engaging, viral scripts for geopolitics, money, and global power topics. I will give you a video title. Based on this title, write a full, detailed, 1,000-word YouTube script in paragraph form without using any headlines or subheadings. The script should be extremely engaging, create curiosity, and use a story-driven style that keeps viewers watching from start to finish. Include facts, analysis, and examples wherever possible, while explaining complex topics in a simple, dramatic, and compelling way. Make the tone urgent, exciting, and informative, designed to get high views, likes, and subscribers. Include subtle hooks and retention cues naturally within the text, but do not use bullet points or lists. Maintain the style of a professional YouTube channel like Global Money Wars. Video title: US-Canada Trade War Backfires. Gas prices surge. China steps in economic reality exposed.